One of one of the most important factors in conception rate is the performance of the animal, or the animal's ability to perform in the environment. When I had a heifer development lot here, about 400 head, for a number of years, and it was very interesting to see how managing those cattle with a set requirement, we could actually predict pretty well what the conception rate would be on different sets of cattle. So when you start looking at those gains on the cattle, or their ability to perform, we could predict what those conception rate, but it was also dependent on the genetics. So the genetic potential was very important. Once we went to later breeding of the cattle and breeding on pasture, on grass, there's more volatility in the environment. It's not a controlled diet like in a feedlot. So there was a big learning curve on how that animal performance affected the conception rate. When we went in that direction of breeding on pasture with yearling cattle, heifers, we noticed that we could not provide the resources to make every animal, to give every animal the chance to breed. So we had to start looking at focusing our energy on a percentage of the herd and letting nature take its course, and letting the heifers select themselves whether they were adapted to our environment and the feed that was placed in front of them, rather than controlling their intake. So that was very eye-opening, and we could control the input into those cattle, our conception rate was higher, but then the quality of cattle that were bred weren't necessarily the ones that were going to be productive, because we were almost forcing those cattle to be bred. Once we went onto the pasture breeding, we kept more heifers back, a bigger pool, and expected a lower percentage of cattle being bred. That way we felt that they were more adapted to our environment, and we've seen the more longevity in those cattle that become bred. The other thing is that really makes a difference is with the production is the ability to keep the costs down. In a controlled environment, when you're trying to get a majority of the cattle bred, the input costs are a lot higher. So once you're on grass, once you're pulling away kind of the crutches or those inputs that help bump that extra maybe 5 to 10% of the animals to get bred, you pull that away, you're affecting your overall conception rate. But if you do it in a way that those cattle that don't breed are marketable without too many input costs, you're still financially positive. It depends on what your goals are, and what your operation is. If you're a cow-calf operation where you're trying to get females bred and back into the herd, it's very important. If you have young cow-calf pairs and if the nutrition isn't high enough to cover their gain, the milk production to take care of the young ones, there's not going to be enough energy left to reproduce. and you start selling young cows, open young cows or late bred young cows, that gets very expensive. So as far as a cow-calf operation, that's one of the most important priorities is having the factories returning the following year to be able to produce an offspring. We took our time moving our calving back from calving the first part of March with the heifers and middle part of March with the cows to the 1st of May. I felt that with the quality of cattle we had, one thing was it's an unknown. I like to research. I like to understand what I'm doing, and not that that always helps, but it's nice to have a direction. The other thing was looking at markets. We at that time we had a very good market for our cull cows, our even our certain bred cows that we wanted to liquidate. One of the things when we started moving back, we realized that the milk production was too high in our cattle, and to keep them bred early and market them to other producers. We had producers just love those cattle, and so we had good markets. So moving that calving back, we were also trying to redevelop markets along with changing our strategies on grazing and calving and things like that. So it was a week a year type of process to get to where we are now. And in doing that, we felt that there was things that we could learn along the way and adapt and change as we implemented those, not only the genetics that we needed, but also how to graze and supply the nutrients to those cattle that they need at a certain time. Because one of the most important aspects of breeding is the cattle have to be on a increasing nutritional plane to give them the best chance of conception. And if the cattle are too fat to start out with and you go on to poorer grass, that nutritional plane drops off and the conception rate goes down. So when you start looking at breeding cattle in June on lush green grass to breeding cattle in August and September when it's the hottest, driest part of the year, we had to change the way we managed our grasses along with the way we were managing our cattle.